You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you can just tell someone was there a second ago? The air is different, a chair is slightly out of place, a scent lingers. That's what hit me the second I stepped back into my campsite. It wasn't one big thing, man. It was 100 little things. The silence was wrong. It wasn't the peaceful, crickets and rustling leaves kind of quiet I'd left behind an hour ago. This was a heavy listening kind of quiet, like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting. My tent flap, which I specifically remember zipping all the way down cause of the bugs, was hanging open just a slit. The ashes in the fire pit looked disturbed. Not by wind, but like someone had poked through them. I stood there for a solid minute, just trying to shake the feeling, telling myself I was being paranoid. You get jumpy out here alone. But my gut was screaming at me. It felt like I'd walked onto a stage after the play had already started, and I was the only one who didn't know my lines or what the hell was going on. It started with the small stuff, the kind of things you misplace. I went to get my fire started again for the night and reached for my Zippo and the box of waterproof matches I keep in my pack's side pocket. Gone. Both of them. Not misplaced, not fallen out, gone. Annoying, but whatever, I had a backup ferro rod. Then I decided I'd just make a cold meal, and I reached for my spork and my little cook pot. Vanished. Now my stomach started to do this slow, cold roll. This wasn't right. I did a full shakedown of my pack, dumping everything onto my tarp. My K-bar knife, the one I keep strapped to the side, gone. That's when the real, ice-in-your-veins panic started to set in. My last line of defense was my bear spray, which I always keep within arm's reach. I looked over at the log where I'd left it, and there was just a dark, empty spot on the wood. Everything essential for fire, for food, for defense, it was all just erased. Someone or something had systematically disarmed me while I was gone, and they did it without making a sound. Just as that realization cemented in my brain, I heard it. The music. That same goddamn classical music, some sad, old-timey piano piece, but it wasn't a faint echo from a mile away like before. This time it was close. So close it felt like it was coming from just beyond the ring of trees that circled my camp, maybe 50 yards out. It wasn't floating on the wind, it was sharp and clear, like someone had just turned on a radio in the pitch-black dark, pointed right at me. And the sound, it wasn't just music anymore. It was a message. It was a statement. It was a hello, I'm here. I see you. I took your things, and now I'm watching you realize it. I didn't even think. There was no plan, no what should I do? My body just took over. All that primal, caveman wiring fired up at once, and the only command was run. I didn't grab my pack, I didn't grab my tent. I just turned and bolted, crashing through the brush and onto the dirt trail, my heart trying to hammer its way out of my ribcage. I must have run, more like a fast, panicked hike, for 15 minutes straight, fueled by pure adrenaline. The music had faded behind me, and the only sound was my own ragged breathing and the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. I started to slow down, gasping for air, thinking maybe I'd overreacted, maybe I was clear. I risked a glance over my shoulder into the oppressive darkness. Nothing. I turned back around, and that's when I saw it. And man, I swear my blood ran cold. Right there, in the dead center of the trail, illuminated by the weak beam of my headlamp, were my things. Not tossed in a pile, not scattered. They were laid out in a perfectly straight line. First the Zippo, then the box of matches, then my spork and cook pot, then my K-bar knife, and at the very end, the canister of bear spray, its red safety tab glowing. It was a display. A deliberate, meticulous, mocking presentation. It was a trap, a lure. It was a way of saying, I'm not just following you. I'm ahead of you. I own this place. I own you. I just stood there, frozen, staring at it. My brain couldn't process the sheer wrongness of the scene. It was a complete violation of every rule of the wild, of every rule of logic. How? Before I could even take a step, before I could even decide whether to grab my stuff or keep running, I heard a new sound from the darkness behind me. It wasn't the music. It wasn't a twig snap. It was a sound that ain't natural for any man or beast. It was a whirlwind of frantic, hurried footsteps, a chaotic scrambling through the leaves and underbrush, but impossibly fast. It was the sound of a predator that had finished setting its trap and was now rushing in for the kill. I didn't scream. I didn't even have time to breathe. My body just reacted again. I abandoned everything, the entire life I'd built in that pack, and I ran. I ran like I've never run in my life, with the sound of that frantic, multi-legged scrambling right at my heels, so close I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my shoes. I don't know how long I ran or how far. I just kept going until my lungs were on fire and my legs gave out, and I burst out of the tree lean onto the asphalt of the main road. I didn't stop until I saw the headlights of a truck. To this day, I can't explain it. The park rangers found my campsite, pack and all, completely undisturbed, minus the items I saw on the trail. They never found those. People try to rationalize it. They say it was a prank or a weirdo, a druggie out in the woods. But they didn't see that line of my gear, so perfectly arranged. They didn't hear that music get closer and closer, or that impossible, frantic sound of the chase. That wasn't a person. A person robs you, or they attack you. They don't do that. What I escaped that night wasn't just a psycho. It was something that was toying with me, something that was enjoying the hunt, savoring the fear. It was playing with its food. And I was just lucky enough to get away before it decided it was finally time to eat. Back in 2016, I decided I needed to just get away from everything for a weekend. I'm talking about a real disconnect. No cell service, no people, just me in the woods. I picked this spot I knew about south of my town, a real piece of untouched land, totally flat and just choked with old-growth trees. It wasn't a park or anything, no marked trails, which is exactly why I liked it. You had to know it was there to find it. I set up my small one-man tent, got a little fire going, and just sat there as the sun went down, feeling that deep, satisfying peace you can only get when you're completely alone. The woods have this way of going quiet once the sun dips below the horizon. The birds stop, the squirrels go to bed, and it's like someone hits a giant mute button on the world. All you can hear is the crackle of your fire and the sound of your own breathing. It was perfect, you know? Just this heavy, comforting blanket of silence. I was just settling in, thinking this was exactly what I needed, when the whole vibe of the night just shifted. It was about half an hour after it got truly dark, pitch black outside the little circle of my firelight, when I first heard it. The silence wasn't just broken, it was punctured. It was music. Faint at first, I almost thought I was imagining it, like one of those phantom phone vibrations you get. But it kept going, this tinny, faraway melody. It sounded old, man, like something from a scratchy vinyl record, maybe a classical piece with a lonely-sounding piano. My first thought was another camper, which was annoying but not crazy. But the more I listened, the weirder it got. The song never changed. It was the same short, maybe 30-second loop of this melancholy classical tune, playing over and over and over again. It wasn't like someone's playlist. It was a perfect, maddening loop. It was coming from deep in the woods, away from any direction someone would logically set up camp. It was just so out of place, so deliberate in its repetition, that it started to crawl right under my skin. That peaceful silence I'd been enjoying a few minutes before was completely gone, replaced by this eerie looping soundtrack that felt totally wrong. I tried to ignore it for a while, telling myself it was probably just some kids messing around. But the sound grated on me. It was like a dripping faucet in an empty house, impossible to tune out once you've noticed it. It was ruining the whole reason I came out here. So against my better judgment, I decided I had to check it out. I grabbed my mag light, which felt ridiculously small and useless against the suffocating darkness, and I told myself I was just going to find these people and ask them to turn it down. I left my fire going as a beacon to find my way back and started walking toward the sound. Every step I took, the music got a little louder, a little clearer. The crunch of leaves under my boots was the only thing competing with that endless, looping piano. The woods at night are a different beast, you know? Every shadow looks like it's moving, and with that creepy music as my guide, my heart was starting to pound in my chest. I wasn't scared, exactly, not yet. It was more like a deep, primal sense of unease, a feeling that I was walking towards something I wasn't supposed to find. The closer I got, the more my "it's just other campers" theory fell apart. The music was pretty loud now, but there was no other sign of human life. No glow from a campfire, no beams from flashlights, no voices, no laughter. Nothing. Just that goddamn repetitive song echoing through the pitch-black trees. My own flashlight beam was just cutting this pathetic little tunnel through the dark, and all it showed me was more trees, more undergrowth, more darkness. And then I saw it. I almost stumbled over it. Propped up against the base of a huge, old oak tree was this speaker. It was a single, massive speaker, the kind you might see a DJ use, probably from the early 2000s. It was all scuffed up and weathered, just sitting there on the damp ground. No wires, no generator, no laptop, no nothing. Just this solitary, out-of-place piece of equipment blasting this old, scratchy classical loop into the empty, silent woods. My blood ran cold, man. It just made zero sense. Who the hell would haul a thing like this all the way out here? And why? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just shining my light on this bizarre scene. The music was so loud up close, it was almost vibrating in my teeth. I did a slow circle, sweeping my light around, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding weak and shaky. Nothing. Just the endless piano loop. I was fully expecting someone to jump out, for this to be some kind of prank. But there was absolutely no sign of anyone. It was just me and this speaker in the middle of nowhere. I got closer to it, looking for some kind of power source, but there was nothing visible. It was just playing. My hand was trembling as I reached out and found the power knob. I hesitated for a second. Turning it off felt like I was announcing my presence, like I was taking the bait. But I couldn't stand that music for another second. I clicked the knob. The sudden, absolute silence was a physical shock. It was 1,000 times more terrifying than the music had been. The woods were dead quiet again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was a heavy, watchful silence. In that deafening quiet, it hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't a prank. This was a trap. The music wasn't for entertainment, it was a lure. It was designed to do exactly what I had just done. To get someone curious, to make them leave the safety of their campfire, and to draw them out into the dark, away from their gear, disoriented. It was a beacon. But for what? Or for who? I felt a new kind of fear then, a cold, intellectual terror that was way worse than just being spooked. I was being watched. I was sure of it. Every nerve in my body screamed it. The person or people who set this up were out there, somewhere in the darkness around me, and I had just walked right into the middle of their hunting ground and turned off their bell. I didn't even run at first. I just started backing away slowly, my flashlight beam jumping frantically from shadow to shadow, convinced I was going to see a pair of eyes staring back. That walk back to my campsite was the longest, most terrifying 10 minutes of my entire life. The silence was the first thing that really got to me, Not the normal, peaceful quiet of the woods, but a dead, heavy silence, like the world was holding its breath. I'd been hiking for a couple hours, just trying to clear my head, and I saw this old, busted-up cabin through the trees. I figured I'd check it out, but then I noticed the guy. He'd been walking maybe 100 feet behind me for the last 10 minutes, but I hadn't paid him much mind. Now he'd stopped. He was standing about 10 feet away, just stock still, holding this beat-up kitchen knife down by his side like it was a pack of cigarettes. His face was the scariest part. It was just nothing. No anger, no excitement, just blank, like a mannequin. His eyes were wide and didn't seem to be blinking. Then he spoke, and his voice was even worse. It was flat, totally monotone, with no emotion at all, like a bad computer voice from an old movie. "Get in the cabin," he said. It wasn't a question, it wasn't a threat, it was just a statement of fact, like he was telling me the sky was blue. My whole body went cold. I just knew that if I took one step toward that dark doorway, I was never coming out. My brain just screamed one word on a loop: nope. Every survival show I'd ever watched, every horror movie, they all tell you the same thing. Never let them take you to a secondary location. The cabin was that place. I could feel my heart trying to punch its way out of my ribs, but on the outside, I tried to play it cool for a split second. I held up my hands like a dumbass in a movie and just said, "Hey man, no problem." I unclipped my backpack, the heavy one with my phone, my wallet, my keys, everything, and I just let it drop to the ground with a thud. It was a desperate, stupid gamble, hoping he wanted my stuff more than he wanted me. I didn't wait for a reaction. I just turned and ran. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life, not looking back, just crashing through bushes, branches whipping my face, my lungs on fire. The weirdest, most terrifying part? There was no sound of pursuit. After about 50 yards, I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was still standing there, in the exact same spot, knife in his hand, just watching me go. Not chasing, not yelling. Just watching. That was somehow worse. A predator is supposed to chase its prey. This felt different, like I was just part of a game he already knew the ending to. I found a thicket of ferns and a fallen log and wedged myself in there, trying to make my breathing quiet down. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves was him. I was convinced he was just playing with me, circling me, letting me think I'd gotten away. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, probably only 30 minutes, shivering and freaking out. The sun was starting to dip lower, and the woods were getting darker, colder. I knew I couldn't stay there all night. I had to get my stuff. My phone was my only way out of this. Finally, I worked up the nerve to creep back, moving slow, tree to tree. When I got to the clearing, my blood ran cold all over again. He was gone. The clearing by the cabin was completely empty. But my backpack, it was gone too. The reality hit me like a ton of bricks. I was miles from my car, with no phone, no water filter, no food, no keys. He hadn't just been trying to scare me, he'd been stranding me. He was deliberately taking away any chance I had of getting help, leaving me to the woods and the dark. The game wasn't over, he had just changed the rules. Panic is a funny thing. It makes you do stupid stuff. My only thought was my original campsite. It was maybe a mile back the way I came. I had a tent, a sleeping bag, maybe some extra water I'd left there. It was my only little island of safety in this whole nightmare. I half walked, half jogged the whole way, my head on a swivel, convinced he was going to step out from behind every single tree. When I finally stumbled into the clearing, I almost cried with relief. My little campfire was still going, embers glowing orange in the twilight. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And then I saw it. Right in the middle of my campsite, sitting perfectly upright next to the fire pit, as if I'd just placed it there, was my backpack. I just stared at it, completely bewildered. Did he follow me here? Did he drop it off and leave? Was this some kind of sick apology? For a second, a wave of insane, stupid hope washed over me. Maybe it was all a big misunderstanding. Maybe he was just some local weirdo who got his kicks scaring hikers. I took a step forward, my hand reaching out, my mind focused on just one thing: grabbing that bag and getting the hell out of there forever. Just as my fingers were about to touch the strap, a shadow moved on the other side of the fire. He didn't jump out or lunge. He just stepped into the firelight from behind a big pine tree, casual as can be. He was holding a few more sticks in his arm. He walked over to my fire, and tossed the sticks on, poking at the logs with a long branch until the flames jumped up higher. Then he sat down on the log I had set up, warming his hands like he'd been there all day. He wasn't even looking at me. He was just tending the fire, humming a little, tuneless song to himself and muttering under his breath. It wasn't angry muttering, it was just quiet, conversational, like he was talking to a friend. I was completely frozen. This wasn't a mugger or a psycho. This was something else. He had taken my stuff, brought it back to my own safe space, and made himself at home. He was waiting for me. The chase through the woods, the stolen bag, it was all a performance just to get me right here, right where he wanted me, terrified and cornered at my own damn campfire. The hunt was over, and I had walked right back into the trap. I don't even remember the second run. It was just a blind, animal panic that took over. I found the main trail in the dark and just kept going until I hit a road and flagged down a car. The cops and the park rangers who took my statement the next morning looked at me like I was crazy or on drugs. They went out to the spot I described, the place with the fire pit I'd spent an hour building with river stones. An hour later, the head ranger got back on the radio. He sounded confused. He said there was no campsite, no fire pit, no disturbed ground, nothing. The stones I'd used to build the ring were gone, thrown far back into the forest in every direction. The ground was covered in leaves and pine needles, like nobody had been there in years. It was wiped clean. That's the part that still keeps me up at night. He didn't just disappear. He erased the whole thing. He wasn't just trying to leave no trace of himself being there. He was trying to leave no trace of me. Like he was just tidying up after a game, getting the board ready for the next player. You ever have that feeling deep in your gut, the one that's older than words, that just screams at you that something is dead wrong? I used to think that was just anxiety, just my brain overthinking things like it always does. But 2 weeks ago, out in the Bighorn National Forest, I learned to listen to that feeling. I was on day 2 of a 4-day solo trip, just trying to unplug from all the crap back home. The air was crisp, smelled like pine and damp earth, and the only sound was the wind whispering through the lodgepole pines and my own breathing. I stopped to chug some water and was leaning against my pack when I saw him. Across the trail, maybe 50 yards into the trees, just a dude standing there, staring. Not looking at the scenery, not doing anything, just locked on me. My first thought was, weird, but whatever, it's a public trail. Then I raised my water bottle in a sort of howdy, and that's when it got really freaking strange. He lifted his hand, but it wasn't a normal wave. It was stiff, jerky, like one of those old-timey animatronics at a cheap carnival. His arm went up, hand open, then back down. No emotion, no smile, nothing. Just that mechanical, unsettling motion. The hair on my arm stood up, and that quiet gut feeling started to bubble. I just told myself he was probably just an oddball, packed up my stuff, and started walking a hell of a lot faster. I pushed hard for another couple of hours, trying to put some serious distance between me and that creepy statue in the woods. By the time I made it to the designated campsite by this little alpine lake, the sun was getting low and I was beat. I figured there was no way he'd be there. I was setting up my tiny tent, feeling that relief of getting your heavy pack off your back, when I heard a branch snap behind me. And there he was. He was walking out of the tree line with this huge, stretched out smile plastered on his face. It was the kind of smile that's all teeth and no warmth, you know? Like it didn't reach his eyes, which were just flat. "Hey there, trail buddy. Looks like we had the same idea," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful for the quiet of the evening. He was right up in my personal space before I could even stand up, looking down at my little setup. I was boiling water for one of those freeze-dried lasagna meals, and he just scoffed. "Seriously, man? You're eating that hobo food out here? A guy like you needs real nutrition, real energy for the trail. Can't be running on empty with that stuff." The way he said it felt less like a suggestion, and more like an insult, like he was sizing me up and finding me weak. The aggressively friendly vibe was overwhelming, and every instinct I had was screaming danger. He kept talking, just rambling about his own expert wilderness skills, never breaking that insane, wide-eyed grin. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar. "Here," he said, shoving it toward my face. "Take this. Way better for you." I looked at it, and my blood ran cold. The wrapper was already torn open at the top. It wasn't bitten or anything, the bar itself looked untouched, but it was open. Who the hell carries around an open protein bar to give to a stranger? 1,000 alarm bells went off in my head. I mumbled something like, "No thanks, man, I'm good." Allergic to a whey. It was a stupid lie, but it was all I could think of. He just kept holding it there, his smile tightening a little. "You sure? Gotta keep your strength up." The insistence was terrifying. I shook my head again, trying to act casual, and quickly lied about my plans. "Yeah, I'm just stopping for a quick dinner. Then I'm pushing on to the next site about 5 miles up." It was a total fabrication. My plan was to stay right there. He finally pulled the bar back, his eyes narrowing for just a second. "All right, man. Suit yourself. Maybe I'll see you up there." He turned and walked back into the woods, and I didn't breathe until he was gone. The second he was out of sight, I kicked dirt over my little stove and crammed everything into my pack as fast as I could. Screw the campsite, screw my plans. I was getting the hell out of there. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I basically ran down the trail in the opposite direction, back the way I came, for what felt like forever. I must have gone for at least 10, maybe 15 minutes, the adrenaline making my legs feel like pistons. I rounded a bend in the trail, and my whole world just stopped. He was there, just standing in the middle of the path, waiting. That same stupid, horrifying smile was back, even wider this time. He didn't even look out of breath. "Thought you were headed the other way, trail buddy," he said, and his voice was low, laced with this sarcastic, predatory tone. "Figured I'd wait for you." That was it. My brain just shut off. I didn't say a word. I just bolted. I veered right off the trail and plunged straight into the thick woods, not caring about the branches whipping my face or the rocks trying to break my ankles. I just ran, fueled by pure animal terror. I didn't stop until I literally couldn't run anymore, collapsing into a thicket of bushes about 100 yards from the trail, gasping for air and praying he hadn't seen where I went. I laid there in the dirt and pine needles as the last light faded from the sky, turning the forest into a maze of black, menacing shapes. I was shivering, partly from the cold and partly from sheer terror. I didn't dare use my headlamp. I just sat in the pitch black, listening. For hours, there was nothing but the normal night sounds, the wind, an owl, some little critter scurrying in the leaves. I must have drifted off into a shallow, exhausted sleep, because I was jolted awake by a sound that didn't belong. Crunch, pause, crunch, crunch. Footsteps. They were on the trail, slow and deliberate. It wasn't the rhythm of a hiker. It was the pace of someone searching. My heart crawled up into my throat. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small and silent as a stone. The footsteps got closer, right parallel to where I was hiding. Crunch, crunch. Then they stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest, most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. It stretched for an eternity. I was convinced he knew I was there, that he was just waiting. Then, after what felt like an hour, the footsteps started again, crunch, 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 moving away, continuing down the trail until the sound faded into nothing. I stayed there, frozen, until the first gray light of dawn broke through the canopy. As soon as there was enough light to see, I scrambled back to the trail and hiked out faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't stop, I didn't drink, I just moved, looking over my shoulder every 10 seconds. The 9 miles to my truck felt like 100. When I finally saw my beat-up Ford through the trees, I almost cried with relief. I threw my pack in the back, locked the doors, and just peeled out of that parking lot. It wasn't until I was an hour down the highway, shaking and chugging a lukewarm Gatorade, that I let myself truly think about it. And it all came back to that protein bar, the torn wrapper, the insistence. It hit me like a ton of bricks. It had to have been drugged. That was his game. Find someone alone, act weird and friendly, get them to lower their guard, and then offer them something. The mocking of my food was to make me feel inadequate, to make his offer seem more appealing. The whole disgusting script played out in my head. There's a sound the Alaskan wilderness makes when you're truly alone in it, a kind of deep, low hum you feel in your bones more than you hear with your ears. It's the sound of a million tiny things living and dying, of wind whispering through pines that have stood for centuries. I was 2 days into that sound, 100 miles from anything you could call a town, just me and my beat-up tent near Fairbanks. I was watching the water in my little pot start to simmer over the camp stove when I felt it, a change in the hum. The birds went quiet. I looked up, and he was just there, standing at the edge of my camp, no more than 20 feet away. He hadn't made a sound. Not a snapped twig, not a crunched leaf. 1 second I was alone, the next he was there like he'd materialized out of the thin air. He was dressed for the part, hiking boots, flannel shirt, a decent-looking pack, but he was too clean. His boots had no mud on them. His face wasn't flushed from exertion. He just looked at me with these calm, patient eyes, and the first thought that shot through my head wasn't, "Oh, another hiker." It was, "That's not right." "Evenin'," he said, his voice completely flat, no accent I could place. It didn't carry any of the usual friendliness you find out here, the kind of shared camaraderie of being so far from everything. "Sorry to bother you. I'm looking for the public cabin." I just stared for a second, my heart hammering against my ribs. I'd been on high alert for bears, not people who move like ghosts. I finally got my voice to work. "Didn't hear you comin'," I managed, trying to sound casual, like my whole nervous system wasn't screaming at me. I pointed with my spoon. "There's a game trail right over that ridge. Follow it about half a mile east. Should run you right into it. Can't miss it." He nodded slowly, his eyes not looking at the ridge but straight at me, as if he was memorizing my face. "Appreciate it," he said, and then, just as silently as he'd appeared, he turned and walked into the trees. I sat there for a long time, my stew forgotten, listening. But I never heard his footsteps. Not a single one. It was like the forest just swallowed him whole, leaving behind nothing but that deep, unnerving hum. Hours crept by, and the sun did that weird Alaskan summer thing where it just dips below the horizon, smearing the sky with a bruised, twilight purple, but never giving way to true darkness. The world was washed in this eerie gray light. I tried to shake the feeling the guy had left me with, telling myself I was just jumpy from being alone. But every shadow seemed to move, and the silence felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. I was just about to zip up my tent for the night when he came back. He stepped out of the same spot at the edge of the clearing, a dark shape against the gloom, and my blood ran cold. He hadn't made a sound this time either. "Couldn't find it," he said, his voice the same unnerving monotone. "Must have taken a wrong turn." I knew he was lying. The trail was clear, a straight shot. Even a city slicker couldn't get lost on a half-mile trek. My mind was racing. What did this guy want? Was he lost? Was he crazy? Or was he something else? The woods no longer felt like my sanctuary. They felt like his hunting ground, and I was the only other living soul for miles around. He took a step closer to my fire, his shadow stretching long and distorted behind him. "Look," he said, and for the first time, there was a hint of something in his voice. Not emotion, but a kind of persuasion. I didn't pack a tent. Was banking on that cabin for the night. "The temperature's gonna drop. You think you could just walk me over? I'd owe you one." Every alarm bell in my head was screaming. My gut, my instincts, the little hairs on my arms, they were all telling me to say no, to tell him to get lost, to grab my bear spray. But you don't do that out here. There's a code. You don't leave a man to the elements, no matter how much he creeps you out. What if he was just genuinely inept? So I did the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. I said, "Yeah, all right. Grab your pack." I grabbed my headlamp, my gut twisting into a tight, cold knot. As he fell into step behind me, I was so acutely aware of him that I could practically feel his breath on my neck, even though he was a few feet back. The short walk through the twilight woods felt like a death march. We walked in total silence, the beam of my headlamp cutting a shaky tunnel through the gloom. I could hear my own heart thumping, my own boots crunching on the gravelly path. I couldn't hear him at all. It was like I was leading a shadow. We came over the small ridge, and there it was, exactly where I said it would be, a dark, sagging shape against the fading sky. The public-use cabin, or what was left of it. The place was a wreck. The roof was caved in on one side, the windows were just black, jagged holes, and the front door was hanging off a single rusted hinge. It looked like it hadn't been used in 50 years. A smell of wet rot and mold hung heavy in the air. "See, there it is," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. This was it. I'd done my part. Now he could have his creepy, dilapidated shack, and I could get back to my camp and get the hell out of there at first light. He walked slowly past me, right up to the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood, and he just looked at it. He didn't seem surprised or disappointed by its condition. He just observed it. Then he turned his head and looked straight at me, his face a blank mask in the half-light. "No," he said, his voice perfectly calm and steady. "That's not the right cabin." I just stood there, frozen, the blood draining from my face. What do you say to that? It was the only cabin for 30 miles in any direction. The map confirmed it. Logic confirmed it. My own two eyes confirmed it. But he said it with such absolute, unshakable certainty that for a terrifying second, I almost believed him. He wasn't arguing, he was stating a fact from a reality that wasn't mine. He didn't get angry. He just kept looking at me with those placid, empty eyes, as if he was waiting for me to produce the real cabin. I started backing away slowly, my hand inching towards the handle of the hunting knife on my belt. "Well, man," I said, my voice trembling, "that's the only one I know of. You're on your own." I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked, fast, back the way we came, not daring to run. The whole way back to my camp, I felt his eyes on my back. I never heard him follow, but I knew somehow that he was there, watching from the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against a tree, my knife in my hand, watching the woods until the sun came up. The second there was enough light, I tore down my camp and hiked out without looking back. I still don't know what he was looking for, or what he was. But sometimes, when I'm in a quiet place, I can still feel that shift in the air, that feeling of being watched by something that moves without a sound, and is looking for a place that isn't there.